For the Living Room Tapes, I'm Jack Wiegman, and my guest today is a person I've been fascinated with and would like to introduce to you. He's a man who is considered extremist. He's a conservative, and we'd like to have you get to know this guy as I do. His name is Gene Williams. Gene, welcome to the show. Gene, let's go to square one. What on earth is a conservative?
There are several kinds of conservatives, as I understand the term. Today we talk about fiscal conservatives, who are people who believe in being frugal and saving money and just not overspending. I guess living within your means. And then there are people who are described as social conservatives. Social conservatives have issues like abortion. The most hot-button social issue, I think, is the abortion issue, because they have this idea that is very, very threatening to the people who describe themselves as pro-choice. Because social conservatives, who are generally Christians, believe that abortion is the taking of human life.
Do conservatives have to be Christians and Christians have to be conservatives?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But and so I guess I should underline the fact that I'm speaking. There are always exceptions to, and there are always gradations within any group of people. What is interesting to me is the way that the term extremist is used, because I have asked many times, would you tell me how I'm an extremist? I've asked that of conservatives and I've asked it of other people, and they've never responded. I've said to people, take one issue and tell me what is extreme about my position. And of course, the people who seem to disapprove of me most will never stop calling me names long enough to answer a question like that. And then I've had Republicans, and of course there are different kinds of Republicans, but I've asked several Republicans, some of them lawmakers, tell me how I could be considered an extremist and an extreme conservative. And I just, for some reason, never get an answer.
Mr. Williams, we understand that all conservatives are racist. How do you feel about that?
I think that's ludicrous. I think it's a deliberate misrepresentation of truth, and it's a political tactic. Obviously, all conservatives are not racist. And astonishingly to some, there are racist liberals. But you never hear that mentioned. But it's my position that racism takes different forms. I can, as an example, and to explain that, I look at the leftist policies of the Democratic liberal administrations. Since Lyndon Johnson, there has been an element of racism in their policies, because their policies imply that my people need assistance. So they came up with all the social programs. The number of people receiving welfare has increased steadily until now. It's threatening to sink the economy, along with other extravagances that government policy has led to. But I look at the inner cities, and I see that I see in my community, I see our young people just running wild. I see violence. I see horrible things happening. But I recall that it didn't used to be that way. I remember when I was a kid, I'm 77 now, I'll be 78 soon, but I remember when I was a kid, there was a tremendous amount of respect of your elders required in my community, and I think it was the same in black communities all over the country. If we were, as teenagers, if we were out horsing around on the corner on Friday night, we would see one of the ladies from the community pass by, and the first one who saw her coming would give us the sign, and we would immediately calm down and respectfully say, "Hello, how are you, Mrs. Jones?" Or, and as soon as she was gone, then we would go back to what we were doing.
Am I correct that you grew up in sort of a poverty-stricken ghetto, as the term goes, like Colin Powell?
No. As a matter of fact, I grew up in southwest Philadelphia. And when I grew up, I was born in 1935, so in the early 40s and into the 50s, my community in southwest Philadelphia was actually interracial. It was a very rural community. If you go back to the 40s, when I started school in 1940, if you go back to the 40s, we had gardens. We had farms in my community. We had, of course, during the war years, everybody was encouraged to have a victory farm. And so, I remember as a kid, my brother and I were required to go up to my aunt and uncle's place because they had a huge backyard and they had turned it into a garden. So we used to regularly have to go up there and pull weeds and water them, and then at harvest time we helped harvest the vegetables. And it was an interracial neighborhood because blacks lived right next door to whites. But there was also always an undercurrent present, and I reflected on it later, and I remembered that there were certain families, certain white families, that were known among our people as being very hostile. But generally speaking, it was a kind of an ideal community. And of course, it was destroyed when the government, in that case the City Council of Philadelphia, decided to do this urban renewal thing, and they destroyed the community. But they took down something that was very, very unique, and something that was pretty good. I mean, in retrospect, a lot of things look better maybe than they actually were. But compared to today and the black communities, and I lived, years and years later, I went back to the community. I moved into this apartment complex that was about 2 blocks from where the house I was born in and raised in used to be, because they had destroyed the house and put up new units and things like that. But I used to have to be armed to go out to the dumpster.
How old were you?
At the time that I referred to just now, I was grown. I mean, I had been in and out of the military, married. In fact, this was back in, I'd say 91 or 92. But it was so dangerous because there were carloads of young people riding around, and the dumpsters used to be enclosed in a kind of a picket fence on 3 sides, and you went to the dumpster and you dumped your trash. But they would get behind the dumpster. If you went out in your bathrobe or something and tried to dump the trash in the dumpster, they would come out and at gunpoint walk you back to your apartment, get in your apartment, and do whatever they wanted to do. And that happened repeatedly. So I had a permit to carry a firearm, and I never left home without it for practical purposes. And thank the Lord I never had to use it.
Mr. Williams, I want to know about your take on extremism.
It's a word that's used frequently by people on the political left and the people on the political right. And I've been accused of being an extremist on the right. I encourage people to pick out an issue and then explain to me why that position is extremist. And I've asked this of Democrats and some Republicans. Never get a taker. I never get a response. So far, there's been no issue that I have ever taken that can be defined as extremist, but I still carry the label. So I don't know what to do about that, but I do know that I, in my own mind, have seen many statements and actions by people on the left who I consider to be extremists, just as there are some extremist right-wingers, and I don't deny that, but I think they're far in the minority. I'm thinking about Westboro Church. They're the church somewhere, I don't know where they are, but they're notorious because it's the group that they like to go to funerals of returning heroes, people from Afghanistan who were killed, American military, and they like to go, and their issue is they're anti-homosexual, and they say things that are like, good, he should have been killed because he's fighting to defend a system that allows homosexuality. Obviously deranged people, but they exist. But extremist left-wingers are far more commonplace than lunatics like the people I just mentioned. And I don't mind calling them lunatics, and I would say it to them. They're fanatics and they're publicity seekers, and I think they're basically a disgrace. I don't view them as true Christians. Of course, that's up for God to decide, but in my view, they're an embarrassment. So I don't know, I may ramble a little bit, but when you talk about extremism, I think about we have a president today, right before I left home. There was a big debate on Fox News, which you're not supposed to watch unless you're a right-wing extremist, which is ridiculous in itself. But they were debating the thing about the president's recent statement. He seems to be attacking the Supreme Court. He's been very confrontative with the Supreme Court. I think he did it in the State of the Union address the last time, where he singled out the court for criticism. And now he's saying, basically what it is he's saying that he's challenging the right of the Supreme Court to overturn congressional decisions, which the Supreme Court has done for over 100 years. But he is using an extremist position to incite his followers, and he's had to backpedal quickly from his charges and his criticism of the court, because a federal judge challenged him, and a federal judge in the Fifth Circuit said, I want in writing in front of me within 48 hours an explanation of just what you're talking about. And they've had Democratic Party representatives, and then finally Eric Holder, I think, came out and made some kind of a statement. No, it was his press secretary. I forget that guy's name, but he stays busy trying to juggle the statements that the president makes with what he knows himself to be acceptable, and he's got a hard job. But the bottom line is that he is an extremist who is actually saying that the Republican Party is extremist, which is another habit of the left, because whenever they accuse you of doing something, most likely it's what they're doing. I've noticed that. There's a lot of hypocrisy. And if I sound partisan, well, I am a Republican.
Mr. Williams, would you talk to us about discrimination and mistreatment of people? Have you been racially mistreated or mistreated as a conservative in Montana?
Well, yeah, sure. And what I describe as the bad old days, every black person in this country was mistreated. No question about it. I'm talking about when they had the Jim Crow laws, you had the separate, unequal restrooms and water fountains and things like that. And you had the constant lynchings and atrocities that were perpetrated against my people by racist whites. That's when racism was acceptable in America. It's one of the stains on the history of this nation. However, the nation has changed. And that is something that a lot of people, some for their own reasons, choose not to acknowledge. And they are left-wing extremists who find it to their own advantage, often monetary advantage, to keep my people looking back at those atrocities that were committed for so many years in this country. But I get more flack here in Montana for being conservative than I do for being black, which is interesting because I came from Philadelphia, and I remember one of my buddies, when he found out that I was coming to Montana, he was astonished, and he said, "Montana? Are you crazy?" He said, "That's where the militia is. That's where the Aryan Nation operate in Montana." And then he said, "You'll be dead in 6 months." And I came to Montana, and that has never happened. I have found more welcome, more open arms than back there. And our people are a distinct minority in the state of Montana. I think we represent about 6% of the population, and I don't know how many of them are affiliated with the university up here in Missoula. But the bottom line is that the people who vilify me are left-wing Democrats.
So it's not conservative extremists who are vilifying the black man?
No, absolutely not. Absolutely not. Now, it's interesting also that you see there's a thing that the leftists do, and this is almost universal, or in this country. The left, which is decidedly determined to paint conservatives and Republicans as racists, will make that accusation all the time. And any black man or woman who happens to be conservative is vilified. And there are a lot more black conservatives in this country than you would ever imagine, because we get no press. Now, the bottom line is that they go so far, and this I find it angers me when I see that some of the leftists here in this valley, who I encounter on the blog, make assertions about my self-hatred, because the storyline is that any black person who is a conservative and a Republican does this out of self-loathing, which is a very convoluted, sick, dishonest put down. But it's to diminish anyone who does not agree with them and anyone who doesn't fit into their racist mold. Because if you're a black person, you are supposed to be one of them. And you're supposed to basically be eternally grateful to the liberal left, because after all, they give you things. And I look at what they've given us. They've given us more and more welfare families, more and more single mother families with the moral degeneration of the nation, more murders and shootings in the inner cities because of the drug epidemic and conflict. All of the evil things that they have given us, and yet and still they will look at me and call me and tell me that I loathe myself. No, I loathe what they stand for and what they've done.
Your position as a conservative encouraging people to vote.
I'm going to diverge just a little bit. I think that it's a mistake to dismiss politics from your mind, and I have heard people say, I don't want to be bothered, and I don't get involved in it. And obviously, if you wake up in the United States of America, you're impacted on by politics. Probably the same goes for every other country. But the people who are naive enough to think that, oh, it's not interesting, they're abdicating their responsibility. The country suffers when people don't keep their eyes on the government. I just had a conversation with a pastor. It was kind of an adversarial discussion. And I was trying hard not to have it turn out that way, and I think I managed it pretty well. But the bottom line is that, and I've thought about it since that conversation, I'm very disappointed in a lot of Christian ministers, because they have decided that they will not involve themselves with politics. They have decided to allow, I think they've decided to allow the forces of darkness to prevail in this country without a murmur. And you see people all the time throwing up their hands. Good Lord, what is happening to this country? You see moral depravity. You see violence like we've never seen it. Violence like you would expect in some third world nation, where kids, last week some kids ran out of school and ran through a Target store, I think it was, and just stole everything they could steal and ran out. Just monstrous things and unchristian-like things. And the pastors have said, well, we don't want to talk about it. Well, I have talked to people, pastors, who talk about the 501c3 status, which is the tax-exempt status. And the way some of the pastors interpret that is you can't say anything about politics. And I'm convinced that many of them know better than that. The only constraint placed on a pastor by the 501c3 is that you do not endorse a particular candidate from the pulpit. That's all. But our pastors, I think they don't want to split. In fact, I had a pastor tell me, I don't want to split my congregation, because we have Democrats in my congregation and we have Republicans. And I think that preaching against the moral depravity in the country, preaching against some of the things that happen in our schools, preaching against the assault on parental authority that takes place in our public education system. All of these things are things that would be in the purview of pastors. If you're a pastor, you're a shepherd. And they refer to themselves that way often. And I'm a member of the flock. But a shepherd does not huddle in the middle of the flock and be very comfortable down there in the middle. A shepherd is circling the flock to keep the wolves away and the predators away. They have just reversed that role. Too many pastors. So now we live in a world where they are I'm sure they're saddened by the way that some of the children who grew up in their church wind up getting up here to the university and renouncing Christianity. I see it on the prayer chains frequently. By the time the kids go through this educational system, this public educational system, the role of the parent has been deliberately diminished.
Gene Williams, thanks for being my guest on the Living Room Tapes.
Okay, you're very welcome.
Eugene Williams is editor-in-chief of the first edition of Ravalli County, Montana. You will most easily find the first edition on the internet at first-edition-online.com. And thanks again for being a viewer and hopefully a participant in the Living Room Tapes. The Living Room Tapes is a volunteer project that is placed on your cable TV. Thanks again to everybody, and let's hope to see you again on the Living Room Tapes.